It's great to welcome to the program today Anne Applebaum, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and writer for The Atlantic. Her latest book is Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World. It's so great to have you on. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I'm interested in, as someone who really specializes in this, what do you think is the primary similarity between those who have these sort of autocratic leanings and tendencies from a motivation standpoint, and what makes them sometimes different from each other that maybe would start to kind of give us a framework to think about global autocracy?
That's a great question. And it's interesting that you personalized it, because usually the question is about the system. What do the systems have in common? Because my book is about very different countries, Venezuela and Iran and Belarus and Russia and China and North Korea, and they have
Yep.
very different religions and so on. They do all have, what they have in common is people who run them. Sometimes it's a single leader, sometimes it's an elite or an oligarchy, who believe that they have the right to rule with no opposition and no checks and balances whatsoever. So no free press, no independent judges, no, in some cases, no legitimate opposition. That they have, either through the power they've accumulated or because they somehow believe they represent some spiritual element of the people, or in some cases just because they're corrupt, they feel they deserve to rule or would like to rule without anything standing in their way. And that desire for total control is what makes an autocrat.
And then when we think about maybe some of the differences among autocrats that do distinguish them materially, are there any, or are the similarities more notable than the differences?
Oh, no, there are very many differences. I mean, there are religious differences, cultural differences, differences in the way the dictatorship works. I mean, I think the differences are often more cultural than anything else. Xi Jinping is somebody who doesn't show emotion in public. He's very distant and far away from people, whereas someone like Hugo Chavez, who was the dictator of Venezuela, was on TV all the time and performed for people and sang and was very present. And so different countries seem to require or expect something different of a leader like that. But as I said, the desire for control is the thing that unifies them.
I was watching today earlier a few minutes of the former presidents arriving for the funeral of former President Jimmy Carter. And I saw George W. Bush, and of course, Donald Trump is there. He's sitting with Barack Obama. There was this quote from Bush, George W. Bush, when he was president about dictatorship certainly would be easier for him or something like that. And then, of course, we have the entire discussion of Donald Trump's kind of desire for autocracy. And he's very impressed in many ways with global authoritarians and these sort of strongmen leaders. Can you talk a little bit about, is there something materially different about this Trump era with regard to your studies of autocracy that is different from the casual, yeah, it'd be much easier if I didn't need congressional approval for things that George W. Bush sort of represented? Like, how materially different is the MAGA or Trumpism perspective on this?
So I think this is the thing that Trump has in common with the world's autocrats. And this doesn't mean that he will be able to behave like they do, but his instinct is that he should be able to rule or decide without again, no checks and balances, no one and nothing standing in his way. Press that doesn't agree with him is fake news. Judges who don't agree with him are corrupt judges. It's not just that he finds Congress to be bothersome. He expects Congress to agree with him, and when it doesn't, he lashes out. I mean, he has a complete lack of appreciation for why these things exist, why these checks and balances, and why these rights and institutions exist, how they've contributed to prosperity and to freedom in our country. And he doesn't have a historical understanding of them, but he also doesn't have an instinctive philosophical understanding of them, which actually I think every previous president, at least those in recent history, did, including the ones who said things like, I wish I didn't have to deal with Congress all the time. Wishing you didn't have to deal with Congress doesn't mean that you would seek ways of trying to change or damage Congress. But that's something I could imagine Trump trying to do. Once again, it doesn't mean he will succeed. But he has an instinct of somebody who probably outside of politics was able to do whatever he wanted. He ran his own company. He didn't have people standing in his way. Who grew up in a life of very privileged, where ordinary obstacles that other people get used to overcoming were also not put in his way, and he feels he should continue to live like that. I mean, we heard a little bit of this also. If you remember, before the election, there were some of his prior colleagues. John Kelly, his chief of staff, said to a couple of journalists, including a colleague of mine, described this moment when Trump said how much he admired Hitler's generals.
Yeah.
And actually, what I took away from that wasn't that he knows anything about Hitler's generals who actually tried to kill Hitler at one point, or that he admires the Holocaust or anything like that. What he admires is the idea of having people who work for you who are absolutely loyal, and who are not loyal to some constitution, who aren't bound by the rule of law, who aren't bound by any kind of ethics or norms, who just do what you say. And that's what he imagines Hitler's generals to mean. And I think that's how he would like to rule. I mean, again, whether that will work in practice, we don't know.
Is that another common trait of the autocrats, which is that there is this expectation of, I kind of call it with Trump, the expectation of doormat loyalty, that you'll just be a doormat underneath Trump and that's it. You're just there to serve Trump. Is that a common thread also with historical autocracy, including in the 20th century, that was the expectation?
The expectation is of complete loyalty. And actually, interestingly, it's not just a trait of full dictators. It's also a trait of some autocratic populist leaders in democracies. One of the signs of a declining democracy is when an elected politician replaces civil servants and others who are subject to laws and rules and ethics standards, when he replaces them with people who are directly loyal to him and not to the system and not to the Constitution, and not even to the mission of whatever government department they work for. The desire for absolute loyalty is absolutely an autocratic desire, and of course it's not a desire that you have if you believe in good governance, because the best civil servants, the people who make the best policy, are not people who are doing so in the name of or for the purposes of a particular political leader. They're doing it for the good of the nation, or to keep the water clean, or to make the trains run on time. You do those things for the benefit of people and not for the benefit of the leader.
One of the real notable shifts during the first Trump term was that a lot of the statements from our kind of historical Western allies, Germany, UK, Canada, et cetera, were seen by Trump and the people around him with growing skepticism. But at the same time, it was after meeting with Putin with total credulity saying, he said they didn't do the hack. I don't know. He said it very strongly. I believe him. Or after the meeting with Kim Jong-un, he made the following promises and I believe him. And of course, we all know they're the same promises that North Korean leaders have made for a long time and they don't stick to them, et cetera. Or, I don't know, I was impressed with how she said that the drug dealers get a very quick trial. They're always found guilty and you move very quickly to the sentencing phase. There was this shift into believing the statements of folks that much of the democratic world understands are not reliable folks to listen to, and the growing skepticism about the statements from our allies. Now, in some general way, it seems great to always, if he's the president of the United States and we believe that he's looking out for us, it's great to be skeptical of everybody in some way. I don't know, trust but verify or whatever the case may be. But what I was very surprised by was the degree to which the supporters of Trump accepted that implicit credibility from folks where previously that would not have been there. Do you have some thought on how that happened and what it meant and sort of how that might play out in a second Trump term?
So again, Trump's instinctive admiration always goes to people who seem to enjoy absolute power and control.
Mm,
And that's the thing he admires rather than what they do with their power. So, the admiration for the leader of North Korea, which is an impoverished, backward, poor society where people live miserable lives, and where there's not just no free expression, but very little interesting culture. There's no, nothing comes out of North Korea that you would want to read or buy or eat or anything. I mean, there's nothing produced there that's country. And nevertheless, what he admires is the absolute power of the leader. I mean, and I think there's something similar happening with Putin and Xi. Those are people with control, power and they're at some level like Hitler's generals. I mean, those are the people that he admires. I agree with you that the additional layer of, these are people who are also skilled and effective propagandists. I mean, Putin was a KGB officer. He was trained in deception. She covers himself in layers of falsehoods and obfuscation, even towards his own people, let alone towards the outside world. The credulity towards them, as opposed to anybody else, is really remarkable. I don't know the degree to which people around Trump really share that or whether they pretend to share it. I suspect most of them don't. But it seems to be a characteristic of Trump himself that because the most fundamental thing about them is their power, he admires it. I mean, I will say on a related note, one of the things that's been very striking as we're speaking, over the last few days and a few weeks, has been the degree to which Trump and Elon Musk, who's now in his shadow or his sidekick, I'm not sure what exactly his function is going to be, the degree to which they have spent time criticizing and attacking American allies, so Canada, Denmark, Mexico, rather than focusing the very first comments they've made about foreign policy are not directed at America's enemies. And remember, by America's enemies, it's not just a matter of the war in Ukraine. I mean, Russia and China both conduct extensive cyber operations against the United States every day on a daily basis. They're constantly seeking to undermine our infrastructure, to steal our data, to read our secret telegrams. Denmark is not doing that, and yet it's Denmark that because of the real or fake or pretend idea that we're going to occupy or buy Greenland that has suffered the most turmoil and consternation since Donald Trump was elected, and not China. And that makes this a very peculiar political moment.
The last thing I want to ask you about, in some general sense, when we talk about adversaries and some that are aligned with Trump say, why wouldn't we want to get along with everybody? Why wouldn't we want better relations with Russia or China or whoever? Sure, in some completely generic sense, that does make a lot of sense to me. What's missing from that analysis that makes these sorts of folks, I guess, sort of marks in some way for global autocrats when that's their entry point to the conversation of let's just kind of get along with everybody? That would be the target. That would be the goal.
So of course the goal is to get along with everybody, and I should say I have no objection to Trump talking to Putin or Xi. There's no, diplomacy is important in any circumstances, and leaders should speak to each other. What's worrying about Trump and about some of the people, not all of them, some of the people around Trump, is a naivete. So these are very cold-blooded people, the world's autocrats. They are, as my book argues, they work together now, mostly opportunistically. It's not an alliance. It's rather they have a set of common interests. They work together using military and economic and propaganda means to undermine the democratic world. That's actually at the heart of all of their foreign policies. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? Partly it was Russian imperialism and a desire to crush and eliminate a neighbor, but it was also because Russia wanted to show the world that the rules of behavior in Europe, the idea that we have borders, the idea that there's rule of law, that we have the Geneva Conventions, that there's the UN Charter. He wanted to show that none of those rules count anymore, that the world that was created, led by the United States, and by liberal democracies after the Second World War, that world is over and that he's going to destroy it. She has an intensive media network of media and influence, and money and finance all over the world, which is also designed very specifically to create an alternative to American influence, and alternative institutions, alternative sources of funding and trade. These are countries whose leaders, whose foreign ministers, and whose chief businessmen wake up every morning and think about how can we undermine the United States. And to not understand that, and to imagine that if you're just nice to them and you talk to them and you have meetings with them, that you can then somehow evade or avoid or push back against those huge structures that have been set up to do this, I think is actually, it's a little bit beyond naive. I mean, it indicates ill will towards your own country. If you care about your own country, if you care about our prosperity, if you care about America remaining influential, America remaining the most important country in terms of world trade and and culture and other things around the world, then you should be working towards building and maintaining your country's influence. And by ignoring threats or pretending they're not there, then you're doing something very damaging to your own people.
The book is Autocracy, Inc., The Dictators Who Want to Run the World. And Applebaum, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.